Hello, my name is Alyssa Small, and working with me today is Heather Jeans. We are here today with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program interviewing Thomas Jackson. Thomas Jackson, could you please spell your name for us?
Thomasjackson.
All right, thank you very much. And could you please tell us when and where you were born?
I was born in St. Augustine, Florida, December 14th, 1951. Florida East Coast Hospital.
And we know you've talked a little bit about your childhood in other interviews as well, but could you please tell us about your childhood growing up in St. Augustine?
Well, growing up in St. Augustine, it was a fun time. I grew up in West St. Augustine, which was kind of in a rural area. It was outside of the city limits. But I did attend school in the city of St. Augustine in what was known as the Lincolnville area. I was born in Florida East Coast Hospital, like I said, which is on the San Sebastian River. It's not there anymore. There's Flagler College residential housing is across the street from where the hospital used to be. But then that's on the San Sebastian River. And that was a precursor from Flagler Hospital, which was down on Marine Street, but then moved out off of US 1 South by 312. But growing up in St. Augustine, basically during that time, it was during the time of segregation. I went to an all-black Catholic elementary school, and then eventually attended and integrated the local white Catholic high school, well, elementary school and high school. So from the time of, I guess up until I was up to the 7th grade, I was mainly living in the segregated community, even though St. Augustine was not totally segregated as some people like to think. In West Augustine, it was primarily segregated, but in Lincolnville and what we call the Overtown area, there was mixed whites and blacks all growing up, living together in the community. Attended St. Benedict de Moore Catholic School and St. Benedict de Moore Church, and then eventually when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was signed, I left St. Benedict and attended Cathedral Parish School, which is CPS school. From CPS, I spent 1 year there in the 8th grade and then went to St. Joseph's Academy for 4 years and finished there in 1969. After graduating from high school, I went off to college in Tallahassee and went to Florida A&M University, and spent a lot of time on both campuses, basically Florida A&M and FSU, because of the fact that I was delivered pizzas for a living, basically to pay my way through college. I spent a lot of time on the FSU campus because they bought the most pizzas. And I spent a lot of time in the library there and taking courses, and some of the courses that were offered at Florida State was not available at Florida A&M. So I took some religion and some German and French courses that were not available to me at Florida A&M. So being a philosophy and religion major, I pretty much had to have those languages in order to discover really what philosophers were talking about back in the day. So and then I ended up finishing up at Florida A&M in 1975, and I came back home and started working in the community and doing some things in the West Augustine area where I grew up. I joined the West Augustine Improvement Association. I also got a job with the with the St. Johns County Vocational Technical School, which eventually became, can you take a break?
Yeah, of course.
When I left Florida A&M in 1975, I came home, so to speak, in St. Augustine. And I haven't left since, basically. I've been working out of St. Augustine all the rest of my life. In 75, I went to work for the St. Augustine Vocational Technical School as a seasonal farm worker recruiter for the vocational program. So I recruited farm workers in the Hastings, Palaca, Crescent City area, and really tried to get them enrolled in vocational programs to increase their employability. And my main focus was employability skills. That's what I taught during the vocational training part of it. So that was what I really did when I first came out of college, and doing that here at home, it kind of gave me a special sense of doing something, because these are some of the folks who I knew growing up, and if I didn't know them, I knew their parents, and or especially the grandparents. So after doing that, I left it for a period of time. I went down to Orlando and worked in computer science and University of Central Florida. I got a certificate down there in real estate, and worked with Stormberg Carlson, putting together PBX systems. So it was kind of the precursor to the computers and that kind of thing. But then when I came back to St. Augustine, I started working for the Northeast Florida Community Action Agency. And from there, I went to work for the railroad. So I worked for the railroad for a period of time during the 80s. And then after, I guess around 2000, I started working for St. Johns County Parks and Recreation. And that's where I really retired from a few years ago, from St. Johns County Parks and Recreation. But during that period of time, I was stationed at Calvin Peete Park, which is now Collier Block Aprilia Park. It's on the corner of King Street, 214, and Holmes Boulevard, where the old Florida Normal Industrial Memorial College was located. They're now in Miami. So they actually moved the campus down there. And my father and mother were associated with that school because they both graduated from that school. My father got his bachelor's from there. Father and mother got their bachelor's from there. My father ended up getting his master's from Florida A&M, and they ended up here teaching in the school system. And he ended up being a principal of Webster Elementary School, and my mother taught until she retired from the school system. So it's ironic that they taught in the public school system, but they sent me to Catholic school, me and my sisters and my brother.
And going back just a little bit into your childhood, when you went to the St. Benedict Moore school, could you tell us a little bit about your experience being in a segregated school at that current time period?
Well, the experiences are pretty much the kind of experiences you as kids. I mean, that was the way it was in society, so it was not unusual that that would be the way it would be in school. The school was actually run by the Sisters of St. Joseph. There, they used to walk from the convent over in Lincolnville to the school, and they would teach. A lot of times you would be doing things in the community and you see maybe 2 or 3 nuns walking in their full habits. I mean, it was all the way, full regalia all the way down. But nobody really, bothered with them. They had the respect of the community, because basically Bishop Verreau brought the sisters here from Le Tour, France, to teach the newly freed slaves in 1866 how to read and write. So they actually came to the community to help the black community. And so that was basically the respect that the community had for them. Even though there were a lot of non-Catholics in the community, they still had respect for the Catholic nuns. And they had even more respect, I guess, after the Easter Sunday in 1916 when the 4 nuns were arrested for teaching blacks how to read and write at St. Benedict. Now that case went before the Florida Supreme Court and it was struck down because the law applied to public schools and not private schools. But that kind of put them on a kind of a pedestal, so to speak. They said, well, you're going to go to jail for us, and you know. But then, of course, that was the 1916 Easter Sunday, which was one of the most religious days of the year for the Christian community. But like I said, those days of going to school at St. Benedict was kind of the same as any, you know, young kids. I mean, they had fun. You know, the boys, they slated to be altar boys. You know, the girls, you know, we played out in the yard, and I never forget some of the nuns when they be playing softball with us. They would roll up their habits and tie them to the side and get at home base and, you know, hit the ball. And we would have other functions throughout the year, like the charity ball, oyster roasts, fundraisers, and then we'd have the normal Easter programs, Christmas plays, different things. Like I said, those are the kind of things that you did normally growing up, but it was in a segregated environment. Now, one incident I usually tell people when they talk about those times, just to give you an idea, on May Day, which is usually the first day of May, maybe it's mostly a school day, we would walk from St. Benedict, which is on M.L. King in Lincolnville. We would walk to the Mission of Nombre de Dios at the shrine. And we would walk in a straight line pretty much, maybe 2 by 2, and then the nuns would walk with us. And then we would go to the shrine. Now, the students at Cathedral Parish School, they would walk to the shrine as well. And there was a school out in North City, which was called St. Agnes. They would walk from their school to the shrine. Now, the students from St. Pius, from Jacksonville, they would catch a bus over. Students from Gainesville or Palaca, St. Monica's, they would catch a bus over. But we would all come to the shrine, and once we got to the shrine, we would just individually split up into age groups. Well, it wasn't split up into color. We split up into age groups. So we would all mingle with each other at the shrine, going through separate programs and some instructions and so forth. And then when you're close to getting to the end of the day, we'd each get back into our lines, they get back on the buses, and we go back to our segregated situations. So it was kind of a way of having a different view of what life could be like in an integrated community, as opposed to the segregated community that we were living in, this structured system.
And what was it like once the schools did integrate? What was your experience with that?
Well, the public schools didn't integrate until 1970, but the Catholic schools, they decided to integrate right away. So when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was signed, I was in the 7th grade. St. Benedict went to the 8th grade. So I finished the 8th grade at CPS, Cathedral Parish School. There was a lot of contentiousness going on in 60, 61, 62, 63, leading up to it. And there was certain situations that we didn't experience at Cathedral Parish School or at some of the Catholic schools that were experienced at some of the other public schools. So during that period of time between 64 and 70, there was, I'm not sure it was a formal way of doing things, but it was a kind of an experimental. We're only going to let so many kids go to the white school and take them from the black schools, send them to the white school. But they had to have certain grades and that kind of thing. So they had to qualify to go to the white school. And one kid in particular, I know, he went and he was in the playground playing with this little white girl, and her father jumped out of the car and just beat him. He was a little boy getting beat up by a grown man. And the reason why that story stick with me so much is because we ended up going to Florida A&M together. And while we were discussing, I'm a philosophy major, he's an English major, and we were in those debate sessions and all, the story came out to me, what he was telling me. I said, well, no, I didn't know that. You went through that. And he said, yeah, well, you went to Catholic school. The things weren't as bad there as it was at public school. So little things like that, you see things and you were aware of what's going on to a certain extent, but then there's other things that may go on behind the scenes that you don't really know, and it doesn't really affect you at the present time. But it just so happens his brother was one of the St. Augustine Four, and that's a story for another day, but that's the 4 youth that got sent to reform school. And well, Jackie Robinson came and took the girls up to his home in upstate New York. And anyway, one of his brothers was one of the St. Augustine Four that went to reform school, and when he came back, he never talked about what happened at the, I think the Dozier School for Boys, because he said he just didn't say, he wouldn't tell us anything. But we come to find out now that there was a lot of abuse going on there, and they finding a lot of graves, But anyway, but that story came out while we were in our heated debate sessions in college, and it kind of surprised me because I'm thinking I knew a lot about what was going on here, but I was kind of naive in a sense that St. Joe was, and St. CPS was an environment that the Catholic, the nuns and the priests and all kind of kept it in a little bubble, so to speak. So to get an accurate picture of what life was like as a youngster in St. Augustine, you might want to get a little more rounded viewpoint.
And you said since your parents sent you to Catholic school, but they were teachers in private school, did they influence you at all in your career choice, being teachers themselves?
No, growing up, really, I thought that I did not want to be a teacher. That was something I shied away from. My mother was a teacher, my father was a teacher, my uncle was a teacher. I mean, there was so many teachers in my family, either teachers or preachers. And I said I wasn't going to be either one. But they did encourage me to do my best in school. And I always thought I'd be in the world of business, but I didn't. Well, I ended up actually being in the world of business, but in a roundabout way. In fact, I still have my business today, but after 32 years. But the thing is, I kind of shied away from being a teacher because I felt like that's not something that I really wanted to do. But I really valued the teachers of that time because they were actually more than just teachers. I mean, my father, he spent a lot of time doing things outside of the classroom that most teachers today wouldn't even think about doing. Taking people's picture, doing programs, taking kids here and there, and my mother was a special education teacher, so her students were all challenged, and she would go above and beyond to try to, take care of them. I know a lot of Saturdays we had a big field next to our house, and that was the place where we played football on the field, open field, and a lot of times volleyball and so forth. But when she cooked dinner on Saturday, she cooked for everybody in the field. So, I mean, it was like they got as much to eat as I did. And I mentioned that to my mama one time, and she said, well, they got to eat too? I said, okay. But she'd cook a big pot of lima beans and rice, and everybody would eat. And sometimes, a lot of times, they wouldn't have anything else to eat other than what they ate there. You know, so that's why I say that a lot of times teachers then did a lot more and carried a lot more weight in the community than teachers today. Because also my father, he was the superintendent of the church. I mean, it was of education for the church. So when you went to school 5 days a week, on Sunday, he was conducting Sunday school. So it's like, well, I mean, I would go to church, and I mean, the first several years of my life, I went to Zion Baptist Church, along with my mother and father. And then they felt like we should go to the private schools and Catholic schools. So I converted later on to Catholicism and went to St. Benedict. But for the first 8, 9 years, I went to Zion, and they were really prominent in that church. So, but once we decided to go to St. Benedict and we converted to Catholicism, I mean, my mother was adamant about us adhering to all of the religious requirements that we had to do. I mean, at that time, back then, you didn't eat meat on Friday. Every Friday, not just during Lent or during special times. So when Murray High School had their football games, and the main menu for anything you wanted to eat was hot dogs, hamburgers, chicken. So you just went up and got an order of fries and ketchup and, let it go. But at that time, I used to go to those games because I had a little peanut business, and I'd parch peanuts and sell them, and that's how I made some extra money. That was one of my entrepreneur type projects, along with the vegetable stand and so forth. But anyway, that's another sideline.
Can you recollect the first time you heard about Fort Mose, whether it was as a child, through your parents, or?
Well, when growing up, we used to have these, Easter Sunday was a big deal in St. Augustine especially, and I'd come to find out later it was because of this being a Spanish settlement, and Catholicism was a big part of the Spanish society and Spanish religion. But Easter Sunday was a big deal. We would all get dressed up in our clothes, get suits and all. And we'd go down to the fort and watch the parade and so forth. And then some of the old timers would tell us, they said, we had a fort too one time. And of course, I didn't take it with a lot of grain of salt because, I mean, who would give black people a fort with guns and cannons and all? No, that's not happening. But I heard that, and I just kind of like brushed it off. But then when I went to college, there was a professor, Dr. Eaton, and I was going to Dr. Williams' office to get a report turned in. And Dr. Eaton asked me, he said, where are you from? And I told him St. Augustine, Florida. And he said, well, have you ever heard of Fort Mose? And I said, well, no, sir, I have not. And he said, well, next time you see me, I want you to tell me something about Fort Mose. Now, him being the head of the department, I'm thinking, well, if I'm gonna pass this class and get out of this, I'm gonna need to tell him something. So I went and did a little research about it, and and I found a little something with the, I think it was through Carter G. Woodson and some information that was done with Zora Neale Hurston on the old Negro fort and all. So I told him about that, and he said, yeah, you got it half right, but this is about Fort Mose, and this is another fort altogether. So, but then I satisfied my requirements to tell him something, and I didn't really get involved or hear any more about Fort Mose until after I came home, and it was in the 80s, and I read in the paper how they were going to purchase a site that was the site of the original Negro fort, they called it. Well, I was pretty busy at that time working on the railroad. And as you know, well, you might not know, but when you work on the railroad, you work 5 days a week, and you have 2 rest days. And they are considered rest days. You don't go and do something else. So the railroad was really strict about doing things outside of your job that would affect your job. So I really spent a whole lot of time, that period of time I spent there, maybe about 15 years, my total focus was on getting the train out on time, pretty much. So but once I left the railroad and got involved with other local projects, that's when I started getting, I think it was in 1994 or 95, I started getting involved with local community projects, the Venetian Club, and then of course, being part of the Venetian Club, and then eventually becoming president of the Venetian Club. I became involved with supporting Fort Mose from the standpoint of a social commitment.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the Venetian Club?
Well, the Venetian Club developed in the segregated times too. It was a group of professional men and women. Really, it first started out as men, and then the women joined later. But it started actually in this building right here. This is the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center. But at that time, it was Excelsior High School, and it eventually became Excelsior Elementary School. But Professor Richard J. Murray, who the school, our Murray Middle School is named after, he was the principal here, and he started the Venetian Club as a social club for men to gather and discuss ideas in order to help and benefit the community. The motto, I think, if I remember correctly, the motto was gentle in manner, resolute in action. That was the motto of the Venetian Club. And as president, I should remember that. But but the thing is that it wasn't so much as in-your-face type thing. It was more of a kind of behind the scenes supporting a lot of projects that were beneficial to the community. And a couple of things the Venetian Club did was help support the Little Links, which was a golf course down at the Gallimore Center now. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's just in the south end of Riberia and M.L. King. There's a community center. It's the Eddie Vickers Park now, and on the site is the Willie Gallimore Center. But back during that time, it was the Little Links, which was a little small golf course that the blacks could use to play golf. And it developed into a recreation center later on. But the Venetian Club throughout the years had done things to help to benefit the community. And like I said, it used to initially met here at Excelsior Museum, Excelsior School, which became Lincolnville Museum. But then they started meeting at Mr. Webster's house. Mr. Webster who was Webster Elementary is named after. and that's on West King Street, just before you get to as you get to the second set of tracks. And Mr. Webster was the principal of number 6 school, and then when they built Webster, the school, this new school, they named it after him. And it was common during that time. A principal gets a school named after him, and he becomes the initial principal, you know. Mr. Murray got Murray named after him, and Mr. Webster got named after him. And fast forward in the more modern times, Otis Mason. But then they stopped that practice because some of the principals who they had schools named after them, you know, some of them went in a different direction and started doing things that was not, well, flattering to the school. But anyway, they said now you have to be deceased in order to have something named after you and thoroughly vet your history.
So how did you become involved with the Fort Mosey Historical Society?
Well, there was a guy by the name of Norm Edwards who worked for the Florida Park Service out of Apopka. And he came up to St. Augustine, and he said, this was shortly after the site was acquired by the state. And he wanted to see if he can form a citizen support organization, which we call a CSO, to support the Florida Park Service and help them develop and interpret the site. Well, lo and behold, this was a new law that I think Fort Mosey was one of the first CSOs formed in the state of Florida. So it was kind of like, you know, traveling over unfamiliar territory and unfamiliar ground. So when he came to the Venetian Club, we thought it would be a good project to take on, especially since so many of our members and former members had been part of the history of Fort Mosey. There was Reverend F.D. Richardson, Commissioner Henry Twine, Otis Mason, a lot of those guys who had kind of laid the groundwork for the recognition and acquisition of the site were, and then the organization was kind of stepping in to help develop and support the site.
And what were the goals of Fort Mosey Historical Society when it was first established?
Okay, well, the Fort Mosey Historical Society was, like I said, it was a CSO to help support, to help develop and interpret the site. And we were going to help the Florida Park Service do that. So, but there were some individuals in the group who wanted it to be a traditional historical society. Even though that name was put there, we were not what we would call a traditional historical society. But that was what we wanted to do, was just help the Florida Park Service, and in whatever way we can, either raise money or volunteers or any type of activities we can do to support them and, you know, develop and interpret it. When Norm came in, we had about 4 or 5 informational sessions, and they were done at the Government House. After that period of time, there was about maybe 20, 22 folks got together and incorporated the society. And the initial president was Michael Bryant, vice president, I want to say Otis Mason was the vice president. I was treasurer, and Betty Riggins was secretary. And we had about 9 folks who were on that initial board of directors. And that was the beginning of the society. At our first annual meeting, we had Jane Landers, who was the speaker, and she really let us know what it took to get things rolling. Because between Jane Landers, Kathy Deegan, and Darcy McMahon, who Representative Clark called them his three amigos, because they all had their part in telling the story of Mose. They pretty much tell the story. I mean, Kathy, with her archaeological field school, they actually uncovered a portion of the fort. And that was kind of the beginning of, well, actually, it's a portion of the second fort. So that was the beginning of really authenticating the site. Jane, as a historian, went to Spain and uncovered a ton of information in Spain on documenting, you know, the fort and the people who were there in the 1739 census. And then of course Darcy at the University of Florida, Darcy McMahon, she put together a traveling exhibit. She's a museum curator at the University of Florida Museum of History. And the story, once that happened, the story got out. And then of course the Black Caucus took on the project too, which was very helpful from the state standpoint. So Representative Bill Clark and the Black Caucus got the money appropriated to purchase the land where the fort was. And it just so happens that that land that was purchased was mostly wetlands because Flagler had dredged most of that land in order to fill in Maria Sanchez Creek to create Maria Sanchez Lake, but more importantly for him to put the foundation for his hotel, which is now Flagler College, and the city building, which is now City Hall, and several other buildings along that creek bed. But when Kathy Deegan and her group did the dig there, I asked her, I said, well, why did Flagler stop digging? I mean, she said, well, Thomas, I believe he had he had enough fill to fill in the creek, and he didn't need any more. Well, I told her, I said, Kathy, I'm glad that Flagler had his fill, because if he didn't, chances are he would have had taken what little part that she found, that little upper hammock that she was able to find that corner, and then there wouldn't have been any physical evidence to do further archaeological research. So it's funny how things happen, but if the truth is stranger than fiction. But then, of course, if we want to reclaim some of the artifacts from Fort Mose, I guess we'd have to start a project digging up Flagler College, digging up City Hall, which is not going to happen. But any kind of archaeological dig done along that corridor could uncover artifacts from Fort Mose, just can't authenticate them from there because of a different location. But anyway.
You said when the society first started, the Fort Mose Historical Society started, you were treasurer. Did you remain treasurer the whole time, or did you gain a different position?
Yes. Tell you the truth, when that period of time when we were doing some organizational, putting together the bylaws, the Constitution, and we had a chairman, which was Michael Bryant, vice chairman, which was myself, and we had secretary Betty Riggin. Those were the three folks that were doing the organizational development, so to speak. Now, once we finished the organizational development, that's when we got the official positions. Now, of course, I've been recycled president 2 times. I've been almost every vice president, and I've been treasurer for a number of years, and secretary. So I've been every position pretty much. So I have been in other positions.
All right, and as for the public, what is the Historical Society's relation to the public?
Well, it's, like I say, it was a citizen support organization. So any citizen that wanted to join the society and have the society's objectives at heart to help the Florida Park Service develop and interpret the site can join the society and volunteer to do whatever we need. We have memberships available, individuals, families, memberships. We have life memberships. And not so much the fact that the membership is important in the sense that that's our lifeblood of the organization, but the volunteerism is a big part of what we strive to get.
How has public engagement and reaction changed since the fort was identified in the 1980s?
Public reaction. Well, we're constantly finding people who don't know about Fort Mose. And we are finding folks, few and far between, but every so often we find some resistance to Fort Mose because people don't believe that there was such a fort. Now, as we find historical information, artifacts, documentation, those kind of folks are coming around, and they're coming around to the fact that there's a lot more to history than what they've been told. And, well, we're just trying to tell the whole story. So we're getting a lot more receptive attitudes from folks who were in the past didn't think there was much history to be told other than what they were already taught.
How was the Underground Railroad related to Fort Mose?
Well, the traditional Underground Railroad is not related to Fort Mose. I mean, Harriet Tubman, which was in a later time period, shuffled and shuttled freedom seekers north up into Canada. But we like to think that the Underground Railroad, that the precursor to the Harriet Tubman era, came south into Spanish Florida, long before it went north up into Canada. And that was because the Spanish offered freedom here at Mose to any of the freedom seekers who could make their way down from the Carolinas, and as long as they became Catholic, helped defend the city from the north, and they could live at Fort Mose. So that was a small price to pay for freedom, in a sense that you'd have to live as a slave on a plantation up in the Carolinas, or you can live free. Now, a lot of people say, well, you mean to become Catholic? I got to become Catholic and I got to join the militia? See, well, if you went into the hinterlands and you lived on your own, you'd have to defend yourself. You'd have to have some type of belief in something. So, small price to pay.
What does Fort Mose and its history mean to you?
The history of Fort Mose, well, to me, it just goes to show me, as well as anyone who wants to has the I'm not quite sure the right word, but in other words, if you open your mind to new things and you realize that there's some history that was going on that some people just didn't write about for one reason or another. So I always say that when there was something going on downtown, there was something going on uptown, and there was something going on overtown, and there was something going on out west. So in order to get an accurate picture of what happened at that point in time, you need to have a picture of everything that was going on. And it gives you a broader picture of the history of what was happening. And that's why I think Fort Mose kind of completes the story of what was happening at that time. The three the three Seminole Wars, we talk about them as, the white man against the Native Americans and against the Indians. But then when we look deeper into it, we realized that there was a lot more going on than just the white man trying to move the Indians off of their land. I think it was more or less, it was more trying to repatriate the slaves back to the plantation, and the Native Americans would not allow that to happen. Now I say quote unquote Indians because that's kind of a...
How did the Native Americans help out at Fort Mose when defending them?
Well, there was one particular battle, the Bloody Battle of Mose, which we're going to be reenacting in a couple of weeks. The Native Americans actually were helpful in helping to fight the battle. They actually were part of the assault to reprieve and recapture Fort Mose. And any of the freedom seekers that came down from the Carolinas a lot of times didn't have any notion of which way to go. So the Native Americans would actually act as scouts and guides to show them which way to go in order to get to Spanish Florida. I know when you think about you leaving, right now you think about, well, okay, I can go from South Carolina to Florida, just stay on, well, it used to be US 1, you can stay on 95, and you can just drive south, you get to Florida eventually. But if you on a plantation and you're not quite sure exactly which way is which and what's what, and then you get the word that, okay, we're leaving, it's time to go. Well, where are we going? We're going to Fort Mose. Well, where is Fort Mose? Well, just follow us. We're going to take you to Fort Mose. Okay, well, you with a group of maybe 10 or 12 folks, and you can't travel in the daytime because the slave catchers are looking for you. So you have to travel at night, and you have to make sure that you're headed in the right direction. And you have to make sure any obstacles you encounter along the way, you have to be able to traverse. So as long as you kept the big water, to your left, and the sun would rise and set on the right, and that you would make sure the North Star was in your back, you're headed south. And that was the navigational skills of the freedom seekers from Africa. They knew all of that kind of stuff, but they didn't really know exactly the politics that was going on. So the politics dictated that the Spanish were trying to destabilize the British plantation environment. So they offered freedom. Well, once you headed out and you made it down, headed that direction, once you got to the St. Mary's River or St. John's River, you wouldn't know exactly where to cross. But the Native Americans would say, well, look, if you go down this way a little ways or go this way, or you got a boatman over here to take you across, then those kinds of things you would encounter along the way that would help you get to Fort Mose. So that's why the Native Americans were very helpful in the process of getting from the Carolinas down. And then and we don't know this for sure, but Dr. Dixon spoke to it a couple of weeks ago about some of the runaways, freedom seekers, maybe just did not want to embrace Catholicism and work and live at Mose. They ended up in the hinterlands and stayed with the Native Americans and became part of the Seminole Nation, pretty much. So that's a different, that's a story that's part of Fort Mose, but it's not directly related, but it's an offshoot. And I just can't help but think that, you got some folks who would just take on that role and look, I want to go here. I don't want to go and live in the city life. I want a country life, so to speak.
What is a fact about Fort Mose that you wish more people were aware of?
Well, one thing that we don't talk about as much, but we probably should, and that is the fact that St. Augustine was a cosmopolitan city, and it encompassed a whole lot of different folks from all over the world. And Fort Mose was a cosmopolitan environment, even though you say, well, there was all black people there, with a couple of whites Spanish, who's, missionaries and so forth. But those black folks who were there were from different countries in Africa. And it's not like, Africa is a one, homogeneous, community. You got a lot of different countries in Africa that were fighting each other and warring. And so for them to come and live at Mose, it's kind of unique in the sense that, they had a common purpose in mind, and that common purpose was to live free away from slavery. So that's one of the things that I don't think we emphasize as much. We emphasize the battle, we emphasize the protecting St. Augustine, we emphasize this is it's a first fleet black community, but then that community had to function. It had to, you had to have people that reacted with each other, and it just didn't blow up, because of the Karabalis, and like the, different other groups. So, I just happen to remember that name, but Kathy lays out all of the different areas of Africa that these people came from, and like I said, they might have been at each other's throat back in Africa.
Do you think it all was at an advantage to them being from different communities once they were in Fort Mose?
I think that was a challenge. I think they had a challenge for them to get, once they got to Fort Mose, I think they realized that the environment they were in was an environment of freedom, and that kind of overshadowed any past differences that they had. And I think that helped. But I don't think that, that was a significant enough deal to blow up the big deal, so to speak.
And going back to the Historical Society for a minute, are you working on any new projects right now for Fort Mose?
Well, we just finished the 25th anniversary. We actually decided we were going to run the 25th anniversary celebration from the Bloody Battle in June 2021 to the Bloody Battle in June 2022. So this Saturday we're having a little party to kind of celebrate the end of that 25th anniversary. And we're going to have some items that we put together to kind of culminate that. The Mose Speaks series is going to be coming out, which is it's a kind of an overall view of the concept of Fort Mose. Dr. J. Michael Francis, he was one of our first speakers. By the way, he just came out with his digital archives last week. It's published, and but he gave us a talk on Catholicism and Fort Mose and requirements to become part of the society and all. And then we had a series, we had 3 archaeologists come and talk about digging at Fort Mose, Dr. Kathy Deegan, Dr. Laura Lee, and Mr. Chuck Mead, who does some maritime archaeology at the Lighthouse. They all are digging, they all either have dug or are digging at Fort Mose currently, and they talked about what it took to uncover information about Fort Mose. And then Dr. Anthony Dixon, we kind of culminated with him a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about the Maroon Society, which was kind of a period where even though we talk about Fort Mose, there was life after Fort Mose, and there was life going on at the same time as Fort Mose. And a lot of that was in the Maroon Society, because actually Fort Mose only existed 25 years. in practicality, when it was established in 1738, and then the British took over in 1763. So those 25 years was the period of time that Fort Mose existed. And within that 25 years, there was 12 years when all the inhabitants of Mose lived in the city of St. Augustine, and then end up going back out to the second fort, some willingly, some unwillingly and reluctant. After you got used to the city life, they didn't want to go back. But the Fort Mose, like I said, existed, the concept and the philosophy and the fort itself existed for those 25 years. So that's what we're doing now. We're going to do that, and then of course we got other things on the horizon. We just got a pretty sizable grant in order to build a replica of the fort on site. And that's something that once the kids used to come out to this and they'd say, "This is Fort Mose, where's the fort?" Well, we hopefully be able to point to it and say, there's the fort. And that's something that we're working on, raising money for the interpretation. And all of this is in keeping with our citizen support objective of develop and interpret the site.
And what are your hopes for the future of Fort Mose itself?
It's funny you should mention that. We've got a visioning session coming up in August, and the president had asked me to chair it. But we're going to try to see what we can come up with a vision of where we'd like the Fort Mose site to be 3, 5, 10 years from now, and in conjunction with what the overall objective of the Florida Park Service is. So everything we do is in conjunction with the Florida Park Service. So, but as me personally, I would like to see the site of Fort Mose be a destination point for anyone wanting to get an accurate knowledge of the role and the participation of African and African Americans in the history of the state of Florida, United States. And it's so intertwined with Spanish history that you pretty much got to do Spanish history in order to get Black history. It's almost impossible to separate the two, especially in Florida. In Florida history. First Spanish period, second Spanish period. That British period is a little, well, touchy, but I'll let the Jesse Fish people talk about that. Fish Island.
Thank you very much for your time today. Is there anything else that you would like to add or tell us about Fort Mose?
Well, I can tell you what I normally tell people when they come out. The Fort Mose is located in the city of St. Augustine, city limits of St. Augustine. It's owned by St. Johns County. The land is owned by St. Johns County. It's managed by the state of Florida as a Florida Park Service site. It's in the National Register of Historic Places, and it's also a site of memory on UNESCO. So we've got local, state, national, international designations for Fort Mose. And that's something that we've been working towards from the very beginning and finally getting it. We just want to toot our horn about that. It's a site of memory for UNESCO.
Thank you very much for sharing today. We've really appreciated it, and we would love to talk with you again sometime if you are up for it.
Okay, anytime. Just let me know. I'm available.
All right, thank you very much.